People who've been to a ruined wedding, what shocking secret came out that made it unforgettable? Story 1. Oh boy. A friend of mine attended a wedding in Italy. Everyone was flown out a few days beforehand. The plan was to have a joint bachelor/bachelorette party where the groom and bride would split up, then reconnect back at the hotel. The bride went out to party with her friends. Around midnight, she returned to the hotel. She headed up to the hotel room she was sharing with her husband-to-be, swiped the card in the door, and walked in to find her fiancé sitting on the edge of their bed with his mother, drinking milk, Apparently, it was a nervous habit he had had since childhood. He would suckle on whenever he was extremely anxious. I imagine it was from not being properly weaned. The bride had no idea about this habit. Apparently, he had been very nervous about the wedding, so his mother decided to comfort him in their room. The bride went bat crap. She stormed out of the room screaming and crying. She told everyone she came across that the wedding was off and exactly what she had just seen. By the next morning, the damage was done, the wedding was called off, and everyone got flights home. The groom didn't show his face around anyone for a long time afterward. I know this reads like that bitty sketch from Little Britain, but both my friend and her partner confirm it is absolutely true. Probably the most mental story I have ever heard. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button, and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. My dad and stepmom's wedding was a complete disaster. For context, her family was terrible on both sides. An abusive father, a neglectful alcoholic mother, and stepparents who didn't care much about her. She basically ran to my father to escape it all when she was 15. A bigger problem was my dad. He was 26. Also abusive, and just a real mess of a person. On his side, he hated his mother and blamed everything wrong in his life on her, a pattern he later repeated with my stepmom. So, the wedding was doomed from the start. It started when my stepmom was walking down the aisle. She had reconnected with her father in the past year and had recently fought with her stepfather, so it was just her dad walking her. There was a branch in the way. It was an outdoor wedding, but he pulled it aside for her. As she thanked him, he let go, flung it back into her face, and literally collapsed laughing. She awkwardly chuckled, no doubt knowing he would get mad if she showed she was upset. The day continued, but she was visibly shaken. After the toasts, some people didn't drink the champagne that had been set out. The one thing she had asked of her mom was not to drink. She was even given sparkling juice instead of champagne. While my stepmom was changing into her reception dress, her mom went table to table, pounding down all the alcohol she could get her hands on. A cousin of mine who didn't know what was happening started chanting, "Chug, chug." My stepmom walked back to her mom, downed the last drink, and denied everything. The cousin slipped out of the tent once he realized what was happening, leaving the two alone to argue. A few minutes later, my stepmom came out crying, went back to her car, and didn't return for a good 20 minutes. While all of that was happening, Grandma pulled up and started cursing out my dad for a ton of things, marrying a kid. My stepmom was 25 at the time, whom she hated, not letting her invite a friend to the wedding, and owing her a bunch of money. My dad told her to screw off, and she left. Then my dad got mad at my stepmom for being gone so long. He accused her of either being a baby for crying or of lying and cheating on him. She sat down on the fringes, tried not to cry, and remained visible to my dad for the next several hours. They may have been dating for 10 years, but the marriage only lasted 6 months. Story 3. I think I might have missed the boat here, but I worked at a catering hall after college, and a night I call chaos at the Dace will forever stick in my mind. It was nighttime. The wedding was going as planned. As captain, I took my post outside the kitchen doors during the best man/maid of honor speeches. The best man came up and began his speech, talking about how the bride really stepped up and changed her ways in order to land the groom. He acknowledged that it took a lot from her to get to where she needed to be. I thought it was weird, but the speech ended, the dancing started, and I went back into the kitchen to help get dinner served. I came out and saw a huge crowd at the dais. I was wondering what was going on when I saw fists getting thrown, with the best man at the center of it all. My manager and a few guests picked him up and dragged him out the doors to the lobby, while his attackers were pulled back by family members. 15 minutes later, the groom took the mic on the dance floor, holding his wife's hand, and said that it was inevitable. Apparently, the best man wasn't a fan of the bride because she had a history of sleeping around. The groom had his uncle, a reverend, come up and say a blessing/perform an exorcism. "Devil, leave this wedding in peace. I command you, devil," which was wild. The bride told the maitre d' to serve cake and wrap things up 2 hours early. The staff were pumped to get out early, but I felt so bad for the bride. That night was ruined. Those relationships were ruined, and this special moment was forever ruined. Weeks later, I met a guy from my other job who frequents the restaurant bar attached to the catering hall. He goes, "Hey, what happened a few weeks ago? It was like Friday night, and I am pulling in, and there were like 5 people in wedding attire in the middle of the road trying to calm some tall guy down." Story 4. I am close with this family, and it was tense from the day the bride met her boyfriend, later husband. The bride's father hated the groom from day one because he was a thug, but tolerated him because he didn't want to lose his daughter. He tried to calmly talk her out of seeing this guy and eventually marrying him, but she was so in love. The father initially refused to go to the wedding. She cried and pleaded with him, and he reluctantly agreed to attend. Being more of a traditionalist type of church, the minister still asked if anyone had objections. A moment of silence passed, and the father stood up. I will never forget the look of fear on the bride's face. She was mortified before he even spoke. The groom, who was justifiably a thuggy piece of crap, had daggers in his eyes. The bride's father calmly said, "I am not stopping the wedding, but the groom is an a-hole. Carry on." He sat down. The crowd gasped, and the groom's father started yelling across the church, calling the bride's father's names. The bride's father remained silent. I was behind him, so if he reacted, I didn't see it, but he didn't say anything. The minister finally calmed everything down. The bride was crying. The groom was seething. Everything went forward, and at the reception, the bride's father just stood in the corner drinking screwdrivers all night. Lots of people talked to him, but he looked emotionless. He showed no outward emotion, but you could see he was just depressed. In the end, after her sweet husband couldn't hold a job for more than 5 minutes, and never could, he got picked up for dealing drugs for the umpteenth time. He went to jail for a long stretch. She divorced him, and he even threatened to harm her when he got out. He made the threat over a prison phone. She filed a complaint, and he got more time. She eventually met a guy fresh out of the service, who went to college and became an optometrist. Nice guy. I am still friends with the family, and he's my optometrist. They now have 5 kids, and everyone seems super happy. Even the bride's father, who no longer has to worry about his daughter being married to a drug-dealing jailbird. This happened about 20 years ago. According to the Department of Corrections website, he was released in 2017. I can't find anything about him now. It doesn't look like he has any kind of internet presence. Anyway, that was a memorable wedding. You could have cut the tension with a knife. Story 5. I have a George Soros wedding story from after my main story. I was catering at a very expensive wedding overlooking Rockefeller Center during the holiday season. 2 prominent New York Jewish families were being bonded. The bride and groom got far too drunk and began physically fighting on the dance floor in front of everyone, screaming in each other's faces. The bride was trying to throw punches while the groom shoved her. The groom's mother was also pretty blasted and came back into the kitchen to blame us, the kitchen staff, for ruining her baby's big day, because one of the hors d'oeuvres came out a few minutes late. According to her, this was the reason they got too drunk and started a public fight. I had permission to leave early from that shift and was getting into the elevator just as the groom was screaming obscenities and had to be held up/back by multiple members of the wedding party. I had to try hard not to laugh earlier when his mother screamed in my face about how we should feel ashamed and how she wasn't going to pay a penny. As though hiring a team of 15 back-end chefs, 5 front-of-house party chefs, 2 catering managers, and a team of wait staff was something you could just not pay for after the fact, after everyone had already eaten. I don't know what happened after I left, but I was glad to go when I did. Now for the liberal boogeyman story. I did some of the prep for George Soros' latest wedding, and while it wasn't ruined, there were a few hilarious mishaps. He imported a foreign team of chefs from a top Michelin-starred restaurant in Europe. They proceeded to get completely hammered every night in New York City and could barely function the next day, or were at least nursing hangovers and half asleep for the first few hours each morning. By the second half of the day, they were back to normal. This went on for weeks, a free vacation from Mr. Soros, as far as they were concerned. I was a lowly kitchen hand, and this big shot chef was nice to me, so I thought he was rad. A lot of chefs are raging a-holes, and this guy patiently taught me how to break down Alaskan king crab when I admitted I had no experience with the task. Stealth edit. You would be surprised how many chefs function while drunk on the job as a regular modus operandi. We had a few chefs who got sent home and were well into the six-figure range while I was there. They would work all day, drink all night, not go home, and come back to the kitchen at 6:30 a.m., passing out in their offices. The Europeans didn't do this. They at least went home to their hotels before strolling in the next day. Alcoholism and other forms of drug abuse are real issues in that industry. Soros wanted all the herbs to be fresh, so he had us buy an entire room full of potted herbs and edible plants. I had to rotate and water them for weeks leading up to the wedding. None of them made it to the wedding, despite being in good condition. We gave them away to the staff afterward. The funniest bit was that one of the main dishes was imported lobster tail, which I personally had to help prep for hours on end. The staff forgot to cook it. At the last minute, the chef, the imported big shot who was hungover, decided it was going to be served raw. He just played it off like it was his intention all along. Soros apparently complimented him, saying he had never heard of that before, but it was great, and that this guy was a culinary genius or something. The weddings of the super rich are incredibly wasteful. There was a team of well over 100 people just for one night of the Soros bash. That was just from our company. It does not include all the people who prepped the food before the wedding day. People like me who spent 8 hours just breaking up Alaskan king crab with a cleaver while standing in a freezer. Edit 2. To all those saying, yeah right, there's no way they forgot to cook the lobster tail. You probably don't understand just how much food had to be prepped. They had to dedicate an entire walk-in plus other facilities just for the prep for this one wedding. That's usually enough space to hold multiple weddings or functions worth of food. Imagine a large bedroom filled literally to the ceiling with meat and vegetables. It wasn't just one walk-in though, different sections of multiple walk-ins were used, but the space added up to at least one full walk-in. Even with a team of dozens of cooks, it can be hard to get everything out on time, even for a regular large wedding, never mind a billionaire's wedding. We're not talking about, oh, I forgot to heat a platter of XYZ with the sterno. We're talking about over 100 plates of something. Even setting that up to be cooked takes time. Never mind plating it and getting it ready at the same time as everything else, it's supposed to come out together. Think of how many people struggle with a regular Thanksgiving dinner, trying to get everything ready at once. Now imagine managing a team of over 100 people with a fairly strict time window for each course and dozens of dishes to prepare. Even for a veteran head chef, this is not a walk in the park. Edit 3. To be clear, I don't think the executive chef did a bad job or was overly flippant with his responsibilities. Managing a wedding that large is an insane task. He honestly did a great job. He was calm, polite, and even though he was commanding a foreign staff far less skilled than himself, he managed to impress his billionaire client. I don't blame him or his staff for enjoying themselves a little during their time in New York City. I hope they had a good time and hit a big win. Story 6. I worked at a hotel. The groom and the maid of honor were caught shagging on the roof. They left in the limo that was supposed to be for the bride and groom. The would-be bride was inconsolable. She sat in the lobby in her wedding dress, sobbing, unable to be moved or comforted. She just sat there and cried for hours. Story 7. It was a big wedding with an open bar and plenty of booze. Most of the attendees, including the wedding party, were flashy and rowdy. The ceremony itself went off without any issues, but the reception turned into a beer and booze-soaked party. The event started to run late, so the catering manager told the father of the bride that they had exceeded their time and needed to start shutting down. This led to an argument involving several members of the wedding party shouting things like, blah blah blah. Do you know how much I paid? They eventually complied, but it stirred up even more rowdy behavior. The party then spilled out to the hotel bar, where people kept drinking. Members of the wedding party were still upset about the reception being shut down, and tempers were short. Finally, something triggered the groom, and he took a swing at someone. The person swung back. Groomsmen started swinging. Now it was a full-on brawl. Hotel staff managed to get them out of the bar, but the fight spilled out to the front entrance of the hotel. Police arrived and tried to break things up. At some point, the groom took a swing at a cop and got beaten up. The bride, who had been standing on the sidelines screaming things like, "Kick his buns, baby," finally decided, well, I guess we are doing this. She walked up to a female cop and took a swing at her. She chose the wrong cop. The officer was stronger than she appeared and took the bride to the ground. The bride's face hit a planter on the way down, busting her nose. She was now bleeding all over her wedding dress. By this point, the police wagon arrived. Several people were handcuffed and loaded up, including the bride and groom. They were all hauled off to jail. Story 8. The wedding was for my childhood best friend's parents. They were only getting married because they thought it might save the relationship. The groom had been cheating on the bride for several months before this, so yeah, already not good. The flowers weren't ready until half an hour before the wedding was due to start, and we managed to get them to the venue with barely 5 minutes to spare. The person who was supposed to make the cake wasn't answering any calls, so my mom had to make one the night before. My best friend's younger sister's bridesmaid dress ripped and needed to be sewn the morning of the wedding. The evening wedding meal was terrible, and a good handful of the guests got food poisoning. Then, one of my best friend's cousins, he was 14, I was 10, tried to perv on me and stick his hand up my dress skirt, but luckily, he was stopped. To top it all off, the relative who had agreed to babysit my best friend and her little sister got drunk and left, so they ended up staying at my house for the night. They divorced 3 months later. ETA. This wedding took place nearly 10 years ago. My childhood best friend and I aren't friends anymore due to various incidents in high school. The cousin who tried to perv on me is currently in prison for fraud as far as I know. Both the bride and groom have since remarried. Though I attended neither wedding, my mom went to the bride's second wedding. According to her, it was equally as terrible as the first. Story 9. A woman my partner went to school with was getting married. We were invited but declined, as she had been a huge bully to my partner during high school. 2 of my partner's friends were her bridesmaids and told me about the train wreck of a ceremony. In the lead-up to the big day, this woman chose her perfect princess dress. Cue the next 9 months of eating takeout and putting on heaps of weight. A month before the wedding, during the fitting, she couldn't fit into the dress and was bawling her eyes out in the changing room. Her mom dragged the bridesmaids into the change room and forced them to tell the bride she was beautiful no matter what, but that she needed to go on a juice cleanse or diet until the wedding. They refused, and her mom gently told her to do the cleanse. Fast forward a month, and the bride had lost a few kilos. It was time for the big day. She arrived at the super fancy chapel with the reception there as well, $300 per person, with over 100 guests. She was walking down the aisle when there was a ripping sound. She continued, and her dress ripped again halfway down the aisle. Cue the frantic covering up of the tear. She eventually made it to her future husband, and they got married. At the reception, it was the usual lovey-dovey drivel. After the speeches, she got unbelievably wasted and started dancing aggressively. After hours of drinking and dancing, her dress ripped even more, and by the end of the night, she was basically in her undies. Needless to say, we missed a crazy night. Story 10. Imagine you are at a small lake town destination wedding for an extended family member. Everything is going great. You are having a wonderfully drunken time at the rehearsal dinner when suddenly the groom, my relation, comes up to you, angry, and starts getting upset about something you said to another guest. I am not a confrontational person, so the conversation went rather quickly. He explained that I had upset Tori, let's call her Tori, and that I did not understand why. He asked me to leave the rehearsal dinner. He and Tori worked together, and I had mentioned something happening at the office regarding their work. This made him very upset, and essentially, he told me to bugger off. I want to stress that although the subject matter was heavy, it was basically small talk. Think, hey, how are you doing? Heard you guys were going through this. It was very much business related. Nothing fraudulent or illegal. I cannot go into details. Just know it was not important beyond serving as a catalyst. Leaving the rehearsal dinner, I was livid. This was a destination wedding, more than a 5-hour drive away. I left peacefully, but the whole walk back to my hotel, I kept thinking, screw these people. I was ready to drive 2 hours to a friend's place nearby. I had already planned to visit this friend after the wedding since we were close, so arriving early was not going to be too much trouble. On the walk, I decided it was probably better to stay. I had not paid for the room, and there was no way I could justify driving drunk for 2 hours in a place I was not comfortable with. Those would have been terrible decisions. The next morning, my brother immediately asked what had happened and why the mother of the groom had asked him to talk to me. Of course, I explained that I did not really know. I had just said the wrong thing to the wrong person. I told him exactly how everything went and what was said, and he basically just told me to be cautious and not upset anyone. Okay, he said. This was the day of the wedding. We had planned to visit a local attraction, and I had to explain to my mother what was going on while we were there. She felt bad for me and said, okay, just watch what you say. Okay, I replied. The day went on, and everyone was having a great time, including me. Of course, I kept thinking about getting kicked out of the rehearsal dinner all day. Then it was time for the wedding. I want to stress that at this point, I was pretty confused. All I knew was that I had upset Tori, and the groom was upset about me upsetting her. Whatever, I got dressed, grabbed a beer, and kept moving. We were picked up from our hotel on a cute little tram, and of course, Tori and her fiancé were sitting right behind me. At this point, I was determined to have a good time and not let this bother me, so I kept all smiles and just generally enjoyed myself. End them with your happiness. In hindsight, there was a little moment of tension. I do not think she remembered the previous night, but she knew something had happened because, obviously, I had been kicked out of the rehearsal dinner. The wedding continued. It was a very, very cute wedding. The bride did a fantastic job. A lovely little ceremony in a chapel, followed by a moving cocktail hour with carnival rides and popcorn stands, and then on to the reception. Here is where things started to finally make sense. While drinking at the reception, Tori came up to me and we started talking. It was a really friendly conversation, and I joked that she had gotten me kicked out of the rehearsal dinner. She immediately said, "What?" and looked surprised. I told her, "Yeah, you said something to the groom and he got really upset and kicked me out of the rehearsal dinner." I remember this part like it was yesterday. She said, "He did not?" Then, after apologizing a bit, she immediately went off to find him. Oh crap, I thought. So now I am thinking that, once again, I've said the wrong thing to the wrong person. She's running off to find the groom to give him crap for giving me crap. Great. What have I gotten myself into? Will I really have to leave the wedding too? Well, nothing came of it, thank God, and the night continued. Tori kept getting wasted. Eventually, we reached the end of the night, and I was lingering, helping people. Everyone started making their way onto a tram so we could find a bar for the after party. The after party was always exciting, and I was looking forward to it. We were all on the tram now, or were we? Quickly looking around, I noticed the bride, but the groom was nowhere to be found. Tori's fiancé was on the tram, but Tori was missing. Security came up to the tram and we asked, "Hey, have you seen the groom?" As luck would have it, security was there to tell us where he was. They explained that he was over by one of the small cottages on the property, taking care of another guest who was sick. I felt the color drain from my face and thought, oh my gosh, he's with Tori. I know exactly what's going on. This is all my fault. No one else knew, as security only knew the groom, not the guest. I've never been one to avoid fixing something after I've caused it, and since I had caused this drama, I decided I needed to go help. At the very least, the groom needed to get back on the tram. "Show me," I said to security, telling everyone else to hang tight as I went to find the groom. I reached the steps of the cottage, and as I suspected, there was the groom and Tori. She was really drunk and had been getting sick. Funny moment, Tori sees me and says, "Just what I need right now." Once again, this was my fault. So I turned to the groom and said, "Look, I know you may not want to see me right now, but this is your wedding day, and the bride is sitting on the tram without you. I don't care if you come back with me or not, but you need to call someone and tell them exactly what you are doing." He agreed and said, "Okay," and I started walking back to the tram. Back on the tram, Tori's fiancé looked at me. We locked eyes in a moment of "It's Tori?" He literally ran off to take care of her, so sweet, looking genuinely concerned. After a few moments, the groom appeared and got on the tram. Success, I thought. We were all off to the after party, and tensions were light. Another family member stayed behind with Tori and her fiancé to help them get back. Everyone was celebratory and headed back to town. Let's drink. We got to town, but the bar was meh, so it was decided to go back to the hotel. Well, wait a second. The groom was nowhere to be found again. I was sitting with the bridesmaids and the bride, and I said to the bride, "I am so sorry, this was all my fault," enthusiastically apologizing for ruining her wedding. She didn't seem upset with me and just wanted the groom to come back. She said things like, "He doesn't want to be with me on our wedding night." That's a paraphrase. I don't remember her exact wording. She was very upset and felt like he kept disappearing. He wasn't far. The groom was wandering around town. After a conversation with another brother of mine on a bench out front, the groom came in, apologized to the bride, and they headed up to bed. My brother and I were happy. Who wants to keep drinking? So, once again, I had ruined this wedding. The groom and bride were in a tiff, presumably over something I said to a coworker, and even though the bride told me, "Look, it's really not your fault, don't worry about it," I still felt awful. My brother and I started walking, knocking on doors, seeing who was still up. It was past 2 a.m., and we were the last ones awake, so we started talking. Since he was the one who spoke to the groom out on the front bench, I asked him what was up. He told me, The groom had basically said to him on the bench, "Never invite the girl you're in love with to your wedding." If a million little light bulbs just went off in your head, you know exactly how I felt. I started telling him the story I just told you, and we compared notes. Let me just say, I had such a moment of thank God this wasn't me. Now, Tori and the groom did indeed go through something very difficult at work together. I don't know exactly when their relationship started, but it grew stronger through those work challenges. So, when I brought this up at their wedding, it wasn't the work situation that upset the groom, it was his love for the person I had upset. Tori and the groom are now happily married and have a child together. Get-togethers are a little awkward, but it's whatever. His mom was really upset for a while. It was not an inexpensive wedding and a lot of people traveled. The bride kept my wedding gift. She's a good person, so I don't mind too much. But come on, people, rules are rules. In the future, if you divorce within 6 months, you have to send the gifts back. Story 11. My husband and I can look back at all this and sort of laugh now, but a lot of people would consider even a fraction of what happened on our wedding day ruining material. Buckle up. Leading up to the big day, my psycho mother uninvited herself to the wedding after throwing a giant temper tantrum on Mother's Day. There was already a history of strain between us, but wedding stress ended up being the final nail in the coffin. I haven't talked to her in years since this all happened. She was primarily upset because we bought my mother-in-law a $100 dress and some shoes. She literally had nothing even semi-formal to wear, having lived in extreme poverty on Social Security her entire life. We thought it would be nice to coordinate her dress colors with my husband's suit for the mother-son dance and photos. Meanwhile, my mother picked out her own dress, which was the most formal thing anyone would have worn aside from me, the bride. It was way too close to being white for comfort, and it cost over $500, definitely not something we could afford, even if she weren't significantly better off than us at the time. Then my mother wanted to control who was in which pictures, and didn't like that. I wanted one with all the mothers. Specifically, she was offended that it would include my stepmom. I tried to compromise and told her she could have her own pictures without my stepmom too, but that wasn't good enough. I will add that my stepmom was the only one helping me with any planning, helped pay for far more than my dad initially agreed to, and handmade all our decorations. Mommy Dearest offered help with exactly 0 of these things, or anything else for that matter. After all this, she was also upset that she wasn't included in the catering, planning, or taste testing. But my dad is the picky eater, and given how she'd been behaving, there was no way I wanted those two in the same space more than absolutely necessary. Plus, Dad paid for the catering. When she finally had her meltdown, these were just the big incidents. There were plenty of little petty things and personal attacks thrown in too. The last phone call we ever had ended with me yelling, "Happy freaking Mother's Day," and hanging up. I never looked back. Unfortunately, because she's so petty, she made sure several family members on her side no-showed, even after RSVPing. So we ended up with more food and seating than necessary, but oh well. Moving on to my father-in-law, who is basically the male version of my mother, just not raised with a silver spoon and chock full of toxic masculinity for good measure. Literally everyone in his life thinks he's an a-hole, and over the years I've come to understand all too well why that is. A few months before the wedding, he started a slander campaign against me because he knew I wasn't his #1 fan. I don't put up with his literal abuse of my husband and his ex-wife, girlfriend. Honestly, I am not even sure what to call their weird relationship. My in-laws divorced when my husband was very young, got back together, and never remarried. He would frequently get belligerently drunk, pick fights with all of us, and expect everyone to kiss his boots while he proceeded to fall on them. Rinse, lather, repeat, until I finally had enough and decided to stay multiple arms lengths away from that mess. I won't get into more details because we'd be here forever, but basically we were not on speaking terms. And the only reason my father-in-law wasn't completely out of the picture was for my mother-in-law's sake. Fast forward to our wedding day, my husband invited his father-in-law on a quick errand and asked him to give me space for the day. It didn't go well. Father-in-law completely lost it, saying he didn't even want to come to the wedding, among many other colorful things about me. When my husband didn't budge and told him that his reaction was exactly why I didn't want to deal with him, his dad literally opened the car door and got out while my husband was driving out of the parking lot. It was a scene. My mother-in-law and uncle witnessed all of this in shock as my father-in-law stormed to his truck, demanding they follow because they were leaving. My husband told him he wasn't going to stop him from leaving, but his mother and uncle were staying. After father-in-law spewed a bunch of nonsense about how I supposedly said he had to sit in the back, couldn't touch anything, and couldn't talk to anyone, none of which was true, they realized he was full of crap. He drove off without them, stranding them 2 to 3 hours from home in the middle of nowhere. After that fiasco, my mother-in-law took an unknown amount of Xanax, washed it down with whatever she could get from the bar, and finished with a couple of joints. About an hour before the ceremony, she walked up to my husband, apologizing for missing it. She was probably as far gone as my father-in-law at that point. Right after the ceremony, my mother-in-law changed out of the dress we had gotten for her into worn-out leggings and a tank top, with a bright red bra showing in clunky brown sandals. It looked terrible. My husband reminded her about the dance and to change back because people were taking pictures. She pouted but went and changed back. When she came back, the back of her dress was unzipped all the way to her waistline, a fire engine red bra visible. My husband was mortified as my sister discreetly zipped it up in the middle of the dance floor. My poor husband looks miserable in every photo with his mother, especially since she tried to pick a booger out of my stepmom's nose without warning, twice. So yeah, those are most of the highlights. Edited to add, I got so carried away with the parental drama, I forgot to mention, one guest went into anaphylactic shock during our first dance. Their EpiPen didn't work, so they spent the night in the ER. They had a severe nut allergy, and despite my telling the caterers multiple times not to use any and double-checking while everyone was lining up for the buffet, the nuts were definitely in something. That family member hasn't seemed to like me much since. Story 12. I have catered many weddings, and there have been some memorable ones. Fights between guests, wedding cakes falling over, red wine spilled on wedding dresses, the lot. The one I will never forget was an all-day event, a small ceremony with a few close friends and family, followed by a big reception with a huge buffet, every type of food you could imagine, and a free bar, all in the same venue. They had booked and paid for 250 evening guests, but only 30 showed up, at most. My heart broke for this couple. A massive, beautiful, converted barn, loads of food and drinks, great music, and barely any guests. At about 10 p.m., the venue was licensed until 11 p.m., and the buffet food had barely been touched. The few who were there ate, but it hardly made a dent, as it had been planned for so many more people. I asked the mother of the bride if she wanted me to cover and refrigerate the untouched food so the new couple could take it home. Her response, "Oh no, there are still a lot of people coming," was the most awkward I have ever felt in my life. No more guests showed. There was a flash of car headlights in the distance around 10:30 p.m., and the bride beamed, thinking latecomers were arriving. But no, it was just taxis arriving to pick up the few who were there. It was the only event I have ever done where we did not have to kick anyone out of the venue. At 11 p.m., the place was empty. In a nutshell, the bride's parents paid for the day, and the happy couple had zero control over their guest list. Her parents invited all their friends to the evening function, but in reality, it was just associates they wanted to flex on. As a result, no one cared about attending a wedding where they did not know the bride or groom. It was basically just a networking event for the bride's parents. Edit. For those asking, I believe the guests did RSVP. But instead of a handful thinking, screw it, we do not know them, they will not notice we are not there, it was the majority of them. Story 13. The bride was a friend I probably should not have been friends with. This was many years ago. She was someone I had crushed on far more than I should have, but I was her friend. Someone she would call anytime she had guy troubles. When I was still crushing on her, she would always say how she wished she could find a guy like me. The classic, "I wish there were more guys like you, but not you," type of mindset. You can imagine how hard it was to be her friend. Looking back, we likely would not have been friends. My only excuse is that I was not as mature and still foolishly thought, someday. It didn't help that she would sometimes give me hope too. Long story. I was invited to her wedding. I really did not want to go. If you've ever had feelings for someone, you know watching them marry someone else is not on your bucket list. But I did not want to be an a-hole and fail to show my friend support on her special day. She had made a big deal about how important it was for me to be there. She even included me in the wedding party as the coordinator and requested that I work with her wedding planner too. So there I was, with the bride, some of her bridesmaids, and the wedding staff, setting up last-minute details hours before the wedding. She was to be married that evening, paying close attention to every detail since her wedding planner seemed more involved with her next wedding than this one. Everyone kept looking between the bride and me for guidance. The groom had been okay with how she wanted things done, so he had never offered an opinion on the wedding, as far as I knew. The bride complimented how fun it was to work with me and how nice it was to have someone who understood her, including her needs and wants. I was so absorbed in what I was doing that before I knew it, everyone else had left, and it was just the bride and me alone. I recall turning around to ask her something, but before I could get a word out, she kissed me, basically tossing herself at me, telling me everything I had always wanted to hear, including, "I love you." She went on about how I was the only man who ever listened, who truly cared for her the way she wanted to be cared for. I kept telling her she was due to be married. She said she wanted to call the wedding off and be with me instead, still kissing me. I told her that if she meant what she said, she needed to break it off with the groom first. I also told her she needed to think about this. I was my nice guy self, the real kind. Yes, we do exist. I wanted her. I had always wanted her. And here she was, tossing herself at me and apologizing for waiting so long to realize I was the right man all along. She even told me how she imagined this was our wedding and how wonderful it had been that we had planned it together, nearly stopping short of asking me to marry her. She suggested the wedding continue as planned, with me as the groom, but conceded how awkward that would be with the actual groom's family present. I convinced her that we could not have a physical relationship there and then. I told her that if she truly felt this way, she needed to break things off with the groom first. She continued to try a few times, and I would be lying if I said I did not want it. I did. As she got close to me, she was more beautiful than I had imagined, and the smell and taste of her were intoxicating. Add in everything she was saying, and my heart was melting. But I digress. She finally put on her clothes, told me she loved me, said she would break it off with the groom, and asked me to wait there. I did as she instructed and waited. A few of the guests started showing up, and the full wedding staff was there, but I was still waiting. What was I to do? Tell people I knew she was breaking it off with the groom? It was not my place to say anything. Soon after, the groom arrived, and oh, look at the time. The wedding should have started 5 minutes ago. I had assumed she had not officially broken it off, and that she was going to leave him standing there when I suddenly heard the music. Here comes the bride. And what did I see? She, ready to walk down the aisle to her soon-to-be husband. She had decided to go through with it without telling me. I could not stay and watch, so I made my way to the exit. But what I hadn't realized was that she had seen me and called out to me mid-aisle. Her groom looked furious. He ran up to me and we fought. Well, technically, I was only defending myself. When they finally broke us apart, there was only one question for the bride. Why did you call out to Linux is best? She claimed she felt emotional and confused seeing her best friend leave her wedding. That is when she asked me why I was leaving. Realizing she had no intention of breaking it off with him and realizing I had once more been given false hope, I found myself with everyone looking at me as if I had messed up. I made the excuse that I was closing the door. I was not going to make a scene and profess my feelings. She already knew them, and if she was not going to come clean about what had happened only a little while before, I was not going to make an even bigger scene. Oddly, everyone accepted our answers, even the groom, who apologized, admitting he had secretly felt threatened by me and the closeness the bride had shown. He explained that he naturally assumed something was up when she called out, and admitted he knew how emotional she could be, adding that this was part of why he loved her. Since some guests had left and part of the venue was now trashed, it was decided the wedding would be rescheduled, but I did not lie. I had closed a door on our friendship. Story 14. I work at a golf course with a lot of history. We host wedding venues inside the clubhouse, with the ceremony held outside by the historic water fountain and large pond. The first problem was the weather. I live in the high desert, and it was very warm, around 90 degrees that day, and also quite windy. Everyone was outside, with no umbrellas or easy-up tents. The next problem, and probably the worst, was the golf cart incident. The bride and groom wanted to ride into the sunset on one of our golf carts and drive around a bit on the course. To be fair, the course looks beautiful at sunset. However, the cart had somehow gotten a nail in the tire. The tire went flat, the battery on the cart went haywire, and the cart ended up freaking out. It came to a complete stop from 15 miles per hour to 0. The wheels and mechanisms locked up, almost seizing. Both the bride and groom, who were fairly overweight, fell out and rolled a few times. They were okay, just a few bruises and perhaps a bruised ego or two. Retrieving that cart was an adventure. And last but not least, the power inside the clubhouse went out due to the high winds. There was no after party. Only the cake was cut, and hardly any food was served. Yeah, it was not a great day to be covering for someone on your day off. Story 15. Where do I start? This is a long read, so enjoy it. Oh, and it's true, love to UN. I was not the best man, but I was partnered with the groom's unpredictable sister, who had once been on prescribed medication, heard voices, and jumped off the roof of their home. Fortunately, a neighbor was watching the whole time. She jumped only one story, breaking her feet, terrible, but it kept her from harming herself further and ensured she stayed on her medication. I was tasked with taking black and white photos of the wedding, even though a professional photographer had been hired for the main portion of the event. First, the church had double-booked the priest, so a substitute, unfamiliar minister performed the ceremony. The alarm went off because the substitute did not have the code. The flowers arrived late, people were being seated while the runner was being laid, and the arrangements were set out, and they were the wrong arrangements. The alarm continued as most guests were seated. Once the alarm was silenced, the wedding mass proceeded. Afterwards, everyone left for the reception, about 25 miles away. To help, I gave some guests directions and waited for the wedding party to finish. They then needed to board the rental bus to head to the reception, first for the photographer, then for the evening's event. I am following the rental bus/limo, not even 2 miles from the church, when a moving truck, coming the other way, gets too close and shears off the limo bus driver's mirror. The driver of the moving truck, U-Haul or Penske, it's been too long to recall, switches places with her husband/boyfriend. The police arrive, and I take a shot. I should post it, but I would need permission from the wedding couple, who are arguing with the cop. The limo bus cannot operate without that mirror. As the driver rigs something to fix it so the bus can get moving, everyone is already late. The groom's best man, his brother, is drunk, cursing, mooning, and flipping off the couple driving the moving truck. The woman is upset, but she keeps telling the cop that her boyfriend was the driver. No, he wasn't. Isn't that why she's upset, officer? We finally get underway, losing at least what felt like an hour. Suddenly, the bus/limo is pulled over by the same cop who had responded to the accident. The woman is still upset at the best man's colorful metaphors, but shows no remorse for lying to the officer about who was driving. I am following behind and see the whole thing. The cop wants everyone's name on the bus in case of any insurance issues. Ahem, fraud. And apparently the officer was supposed to do this before we left, so he's covering his own behind. Delayed, frustrated, and upset, the bride is trying to calm the groom down. He is nearly yelling at the cop. It's getting dark now, and I have no flash or film ready to take any more photos, nor do I want to upset the officer. I walk over as the bus driver gets everyone back on the bus just off the ramp to the interstate, and I speak with the cop. He is curt and asks me for the wedding party's name. I provide it, and he stops writing on his pad. He steps out of the patrol car, heads over to the bus/limo driver's window, and tells him to go on and leave. As I run back to my vehicle behind the bus, the groom looks at me and says, "What did you say?" I reply, "I told them your last name. Guess your family has some pull." He smiles and smacks his head like, duh. Ever see The Godfather? It seems the groom's father and mother are known in the county and school district too well. Hint, Italian family. The cop then gets out and tells the bus/limo driver to proceed. A week later, we learned that he had told the story to his pals at the precinct. The wedding party found no humor in it. Ironically, the bride would later have that cop's child in her class. Oh, just you wait. The party finally arrives late to the reception. The photographer is upset, having lost 3 hours of light, but proceeds to round up the bride and groom and get the shots done. I shadow the sister because she has a history of ruining events and wants to be the center of attention. Then her angry boyfriend shows up, a guy who once pulled a knife on her brother, the groom, in their own house. They have it out, but take it to the parking lot. Good girl. I go looking for her, saying, "We have to dance together," as she finishes fighting with him. Then he whips out his little dingus, "Wish I had a camera," and pees on someone's car. Classy. After returning to the reception, a commotion breaks out, and it's not good. Everyone feared the groom's sister would ruin the wedding, but it turns out the bride's brother, struggling with a mental issue, trashed the bathroom, demolishing a stall. I wasn't the best candid photographer. I'd had champagne and hors d'oeuvres and didn't want to stick a lens like a paparazzo into someone who was mentally unstable and drunk. It turns out he had been on medication but made the poor choice to mix it with several drinks. He's not actually unstable. It was an uncalculated mistake. Don't mix medication and alcohol. Don't people know it can kill you or others? It ended without further drama. The entire groom's family is one big arrested development. Years later, the groom, a pathological liar he would be proud of, left his young son alone for several hours at some horror convention and lied about it. An intimate encounter with a horror fan was just part of the lie he denied, and he lost his job for months without telling his wife. I remember all this because I put the guy up for 3 months, and he took advantage of my kindness. Over the years, I realized the groom lied to me, to his spouse, to everyone. That is all he does. Eventually, they divorced, and the wife was a saint for putting up with his behavior for so long. Who knows where he ended up? Surprise, Florida? The bride? She's doing well, raised her family without that POS, and moved on. Maybe it wasn't a complete ruin, but it sure was something I won't forget. Story 16. I am a wedding photographer. I was at a really fancy wedding a couple of years ago, a typical outdoor affair at a swanky location in the middle of nowhere. The venue was beautiful. It had a large concrete stairway flanked by water fountains that led down to the altar area, so the bride could be seen by everyone as if she were descending from heaven. The ceremony began, and the bridal party came down and took their places. Then the bride appeared with her father. She took 3 or 4 steps down the concrete stairs when her shoe twisted, and she tumbled down at least 12 feet, taking out most of her front teeth in the fall. There was so much blood everywhere. Because the venue was so isolated, it took a good 40 minutes for an ambulance to arrive. She was in intense pain, but ultimately she was okay. I received an email from them weeks later with the rescheduled date. This time, there were no stairs anywhere in sight. Story 17. It did not ruin the wedding or marriage, but it came close. An English guy was marrying an Irish girl in Ireland. The wedding guests were mostly her family, including relatives from Northern Ireland, the nationalist, Republican parts, and his English friends and family. The wedding itself went off fine, very romantic, a nice ceremony. But then at the reception, it was time for speeches, specifically the best man speech. The best man was a particularly red-faced, Brexit-voting Englishman. He proceeded to make the most insensitive, offensive speech, filled with jokes about recolonizing Ireland one woman at a time. He said the stag party had been a good Friday, but the hangover was so bad it led to a bloody Sunday. You get the idea. He wrapped up the speech by commenting that the speeches had gone on so long, it was like the guests were on a hunger strike. Throughout all of this, the English groom and his friends and family were laughing. They thought it was funny. Her Irish family, however, was fuming. I was there as the +1 of one of the bride's cousins. It was aggressively awkward, and many of her cousins and uncles simply refused to mingle with the groom's family at all. I am no longer in touch with the person who took me, so I do not know how the marriage is going. The bride was very kind, and despite the best man's speech, the groom seemed like a nice enough guy. Story 18. I kinda ruined a moment at a wedding about 7 or 8 years ago. The bride was my girlfriend's friend. The venue was really beautiful, green and lush, high on a hill overlooking the ocean. Everything was going well until some of the bride's other friends, artsy, bohemian types, decided to release lots of Japanese floating lanterns. You know, those paper lanterns with a tea candle inside that drift away in the breeze. It was midsummer, right in wildfire season. In fact, the glow and smoke from a nearby fire over the next hill were visible. The wind was blowing from the sea inland. By that point, I probably had some drinks in me, and I didn't realize I was ruining the moment until later. I just pointed out that I didn't think it was a good idea to release lots of candles into the air when people were fighting a raging fire a few kilometers away. For a brief moment, I found myself at the center of a group of about 20 people silently staring at me, bride and groom included. Thankfully, they had lots of other activities planned, and we moved on to the next one. It's one of those rare situations in life that I feel both proud and mortified about. As for the couple, I hear they are divorcing now. Sad. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.